Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Gage and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my hidden gems for week 1 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Due to the events of last night's Thursday night football game, there seems to be an imbalance in the current fantasy football universe. Of course, with players like Rob Gronkowski, Antonio Brown having performances like it's once again 2015, has us all very much so confused. But, of course, with such an imbalance in the universe, it requires correction. And that's exactly what I'm going to accomplish today. As I look and search for these 6 hidden gems across the fantasy football landscape, whether it is throughout different timelines, to different planets, and throughout different teams, I'll be talking about 6 different players that present not only value come week 1 of the 2021 fantasy football season, that not only potentially help you secure a victory this week, but for weeks to come. I'll mention prospects that are being rostered in less than 65% of leagues today. And of course, many of these prospects being started come week 1 in less than 10% of those leagues. After I go ahead and collect all 6 hidden gems, I'll finally rest and watch the sunrise on a grateful universe. All right, so let's get into it, shall we? We're going to, of course, be talking about 6 players that, in my opinion, going into week 1, and of course, beyond that, are going to give you a lot of potential value in the fantasy football landscape. Like I mentioned, a lot of these players are rostered in less than 65% of leagues, but I just want to preface, before we begin talking about these players, do not look at the hidden gems as guys that must be started this week. Otherwise, the video would be called Must Start Players. I'm mentioning players that not only have value this week, and you could potentially pick up off of your waivers and stash on your bench, and perhaps if you're in a deeper league and you really are desperate for a play due to an injury that has come about in the last couple of days, perhaps then you can start said player. But ultimately, a lot of these players are going to be guys that you stash and wait and see how they're going to produce in the coming weeks, while others that I will specifically mention are guys that I'm confident potentially starting this upcoming week. For many of these prospects, I'll be going out on a limb, specifically this gentleman over here to the left of me. And as we always mention, making decisions like this and going out on a limb like this, it's all part of the game of fantasy football. And like Thanos once said, the hardest choices require the strongest of wills. And that's, of course, what we'll have today. Beginning with Russell Gage as our Power Stone. Instead of going to decimate Xandar in order to collect this Power Stone, we're just going to go to Atlanta and, of course, take on the matchup, as Russell Gage has the benefit of playing against the Philadelphia Eagles this upcoming week, and that does play a huge factor in the reason why I wanted to mention him today. But there are multiple factors in different instances that are certainly going to give Russell Gage potential value this upcoming week. But the reason I want to highlight him is because I did have a conversation with someone in the community earlier this week about Russell Gage, and I wanted to potentially just go and get a deeper dive as to what he's capable of doing rest of season and whether he has value, because we have seen, just going back to last year, week 1, that he does have value in PPR formats. And of course, I want to potentially exploit every potential fantasy prospect I can grab if in fact they're going to give me value. Now, specifically, why do I have him as our Power Stone this upcoming week? Because with great power comes great responsibility. And the reason why I went with another Marvel-related quote there is because at this current moment in time, without Julio Jones in the lineup, of course, Julio Jones this offseason went to the Tennessee Titans, I think Russell Gage steps up as that number 2 receiving option between the wide receiver core of him, Zacchaeus, and Calvin Ridley. So as we go into week 1 of the 2021 season, I believe that there's a lot of responsibility for him to make an impact on this offense, and it's nothing that we haven't seen him accomplish in years past. In fact, in the last 2 seasons, at the back end of both the 2019 and the 2020 season, there were both instances in time in which either Calvin Ridley or Julio Jones missed up to 4 games. In that time span, in which, of course, one of the 2 stud wide receivers of the former Atlanta Falcons teams were gone, Calvin Ridley absolutely stepped up and was a monster in terms of his overall productivity in a full PPR scoring format. In fact, in the 4 games between weeks 13 through 17 that Russell Gage played in which either Julio Jones or Calvin Ridley were out, the guy was incredible, putting up 16.2, 8.3, 10.6, and 13.8 fantasy points. Going into 2020, from weeks 12 through 17, he had very similar, if not more improved numbers, in which he had 2 games of, yes, only putting up 6 fantasy points, but then the rest of the games were plus 17 fantasy points in the 3 other contests. In the last 2 seasons, without one of those 2 stud performers in the lineup, in a consecutive game basis, Russell Gage has really found himself a home in the slot position and found a lot of success in doing so. In fact, averaging 13.7 fantasy points per game in the 10 games that I prior mentioned. Now, going into week 1 of the 2021 season, the reason why I have a confidence in potentially starting Russell Gage is due to the fact that he has an incredible matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. Currently being the slot wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons hasn't always been the most valuable thing, but because there are so many potential targets up for grab and the success that, of course, Russell Gage has presented to us without Julio Jones in the lineup, I think there's a very good argument that playing against the Philadelphia Eagles, but specifically Avonte Maddox, who is going to be their slot cornerback when they're in nickel or dime packages, I think it's going to be very difficult for Maddox to be able to cover Russell Gage, considering the fact that Avonte Maddox last season in the 10 games that he played, he allowed 1.71 fantasy points per target to opposing wide receivers. And on top of it, according to Pro Football Focus, my goodness, he was the 3rd lowest graded cornerback amongst all in 2020. That says a lot. With all of this information said, I do believe that the Atlanta Falcons have their biggest potential offensive advantage throughout the passing game in comparison to trying to run the ball on Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, Ryan Kerrigan, who will be stopping the run. There's going to be far more success to be had as you air it out, through, whether it is to Calvin Ridley or Russell Gage or to Kyle Pitts. There's a lot of threats on this offense, and with potentially Matt Ryan taking another step forward this year, improving in comparison to the last 2 years with Dirk Cutter as his offensive coordinator, I think that Russell Gage is going to play a huge part of this offense. Again, like I mentioned, he is only rostered in 31% of leagues right now. So that means 69% of total leagues, he's available on your waivers. And currently, as of this week, he's only being started in 5% of leagues. Like I mentioned, I think Russell Gage is a good option for this week. And if you don't even want to start him, just pick him up, throw him on your roster, and potentially see what he can benefit in the coming weeks. Now that we've covered that, we can go ahead and move on to our next hidden gem. This time, the Sorcerer Supreme, of course, is going to open up a portal with his sling ring, but we are going to find Terrace Marshall this upcoming week as our time stone. Now, the reason why I wanted to mention Terrace Marshall, the rookie wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers, a guy formerly out of LSU, is because it's only a matter of time until Terrace Marshall becomes a viable fantasy prospect, regardless of course, having Christian McCaffrey, Robbie Anderson, and DJ Moore in this offense. When I look at the upcoming schedule of the Carolina Panthers, I see that they're going to, of course, play the New York Jets in week 1, then play New Orleans, Houston, Dallas, Philadelphia, Minnesota, the Giants, and Atlanta. That schedule is, in fact, the best schedule amongst all wide receivers in the National Football League, which is the reason why I'm so high on DJ Moore and, of course, Robbie Anderson in the coming weeks. But why not potentially invest in a guy like Terrace Marshall, a guy that's only rostered in 20% of leagues as it currently stands, a guy that in the preseason thus far had incredible performances. In every single preseason game he played, he had at least 3 receptions and over 40 receiving yards, and even in the final preseason game scored a touchdown for the Carolina Panthers. When we look at what he was capable of doing at LSU and the promise that he showed there, of course, in the 2019 season, he was often overshadowed by guys like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, but when it was all him and he was the number 1 wide receiver of the LSU offense in 2020, the guy had 48 receptions for 731 yards and 10 receiving touchdowns in just 7 total games. There's a lot of potential for a guy like Terrace Marshall, and there's a reason why. Everybody's kind of whispering about him, but they're not exactly sure when they want to invest. I think it's, as of this moment in time, week 1, that you need to get him on your roster. Because by the time you get to week 2 or 3 and he finally has his breakout game, it'll be too late by then. I mean, when I think about his former college teammate, Justin Jefferson, last year, yes, week 1 and 2 wasn't great. He finally had his week 3 breakout, and it was a matter of whether you had enough fab or whether you had the top waiver spot to acquire him on your team. And we saw where Justin Jefferson went. And I'm not expecting Terrace Marshall to become the next Justin Jefferson. But when we look at what their similarities are, of course, the schedule makes a difference. There's a reason why we went after Justin Jefferson, because after his first 2 weeks, he played against Tennessee, Houston, Seattle, Atlanta, Green Bay, Detroit. Those were such easy games and very similar to Terrace Marshall this upcoming season. Dread it, run from it. Destiny arrives all the same. I think Terrace Marshall, as our time stone this week, is going to be a very vital part of the entire fantasy football landscape this upcoming season. So you might as well invest now and grab him and throw him on your bench. I'm absolutely not telling you to start him this week, but for sure grab him and reap the rewards over time. Moving on to our next fantasy prospect and our next hidden gem, we talk about Marquise Brown. This one's a difficult one because the Ravens, they've gone through a lot in the last couple weeks, and this month for them, it pays a heavy toll. But it's no time to mourn. It's time to talk about this week's Soulstone, Marquise Hollywood Brown. And yes, his cousin, Antonio Brown, did have an incredible night last night. And maybe this week is a Brown week. Maybe A.J. Brown's going to pop off as well. We never know. But at this current moment in time, when I think of the potential of Marquise Brown going into week 1 of the 2021 fantasy football season, I see an incredible schedule ahead of him with the Las Vegas Raiders on Monday Night Football. And yes, this offense has lost J.K. Dobbins, Justice Hill, most recently Gus Edwards. They even had to send Nick Boyle, their second-string tight end, to the injured reserve today. They're certainly at an all-time low in terms of pieces in this offense. Rashad Bateman, a guy that they drafted, he had surgery this offseason. So what do they have? They've got Lamar. They've got a slew of running backs that they've, of course, just acquired. And then they have Mark Andrews, Marquise Brown, and Sammy Watkins. And though we have to be careful about week 1 Watkins, I do believe Marquise Brown is in a very viable spot to have a breakout week this week and continue where he left off in 2020. Now, you may be wondering, well, Andrew, Marquise Brown is probably rostered in majority leagues. That is in fact correct, but he is still available to be rostered in 42% of leagues and is only being started in 11% of leagues this week. Now, when I look at what he was capable of producing last year, from weeks 12 through 19, that of course goes week 19, the second week of the NFL playoffs, he was putting up incredible performances. In fact, put up double-digit performances in a half PPR every single week. 16.5, 12.4, 12, 12.8, 10.5, 18.6, 16.3, and 10.5. Unbelievable consecutive performances. In fact, scored 6 touchdowns throughout those 8 games. And to be honest, going into the 2021 fantasy football season, having to go up against either Trayvon Mullen or Casey Hayward, I mean, those are some of the easiest matchups that you can possibly ask for. When we talk about secondaries giving up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers, the Las Vegas Raiders are not shy of doing so. Besides their cornerbacks being some of the worst in the National Football League in terms of one-on-one coverage, their safeties, I know they drafted a rookie. He could potentially, because of course the experience factor is not there, not transition well in week 1. And of course, you have Jonathan Abram on the other side, who is in fact the worst coverage safety in the entire NFL, according to Pro Football Focus. In my opinion, I think there's a lot of potential for Hollywood Brown to have himself a great week here. And due to the sacrifice that, of course, Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins have made in the last couple weeks, who are obviously going to be huge factors in this offense, I think Marquise Brown is going to step up as this week's Soulstone. Moving on to our next hidden gem, we have ourselves Tevin Coleman. And the space zone is a very interesting one, mainly because, when we look out throughout the universe, there's only one thing that, in my opinion, we should all be looking for when we look through that waiver wire and we look through the free agents in our league. We should look for guys that could potentially be starting running backs, guys that we can invest in, that can eventually be guys that maybe you don't have to start every week, but in a good matchup and provide a lot of productivity regardless of scoring format. But specifically in the case of Tevin Coleman, he is certainly a 3-down back and has served as such, whether it was in San Francisco or in years past with the Atlanta Falcons. Now, going into the 2021 season, playing for the New York Jets, this running back, group can be considered a running back by committee, whether it is Ty Johnson, Michael Carter, Michael Pirine, and Tevin Coleman. But the advantage that Tevin Coleman specifically holds over the rest of this backfield is the fact that he already has a relationship with the coaching staff, and he was brought in to the New York Jets organization because of his familiarity with the offensive coordinator. The offensive coordinator of the New York Jets, as it currently stands, is Mike LaFleur. He used to be the passing offensive coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers since 2017. He's also the brother of Matt LaFleur, the current head coach of the Green Bay Packers. And what both of those organizations have in common with Shanahan and LaFleur is, of course, they like to air it out a little bit, to say the very least, but they always want to establish the run, and I expect the New York Jets to be doing so. And that's the reason why they brought in Tevin Coleman, because of the experience that he has. By having another leader out on the field, you can be another coach for a young quarterback like Zach Wilson. But going into this upcoming week, they have an incredible matchup, and as it currently stands, Tevin Coleman is only rostered in 30% of leagues. When you play against the Carolina Panthers, we all know how many points they give up. I mean, when I was just looking at the amount of points they were giving up to running backs last year, of course, they were amongst the top 5. But Josh Jacobs went for 34, Leonard Fournette 25. Even in a different game, Ronald Jones went for 26 against them. Austin Eckler 26. Todd Gurley went for 23 points against them. Kamara 19. Aaron Jones 23. J.D. McKissic went for 19 points. Even Ty Montgomery in week 17 of the 2020 season ran for 100 yards on that defense. I mean, what more can you ask for in terms of an incredible matchup? And when we talk about what Tevin Coleman's even done against the Carolina Panthers in years past, going back to 2019 when he was with the 49ers, he had himself a 36.8 point game against this Carolina Panthers defense because, again, it has been a systemic issue for the Carolina Panthers in terms of their overall roster construction that they have not been able to stop the run. With the improvements that this offense have made, whether it is with the wide receiver position, specifically offensive line, you bring in Vera Tucker, first round pick, left guard, he's going to be starting there. You bring in Morgan Moses, the 7th best run blocking offensive tackle in the entire National Football League. You put him on the right side of your line. To be honest, you've got improvements everywhere. And I think this offense is kind of being undervalued. And I think Tevin Coleman is respectively being undervalued because, of course, his injury history, and they're assuming this is going to be a running back by committee situation. I think he could very easily be a 3-down back. And though there are going to be sprinkles of Ty Johnson and Michael Carter potentially, and LaMichael P. Ryan, I expect Tevin Coleman to dominate the majority of the snaps and be the starter for this team and present himself value not only for this week, but for going on into the future. We move on to our next hidden gem, which is the reality of the situation as we talk about Justin Jackson. Justin Jackson is going to be the ether and or the reality stone this week because as it currently stands, Austin Ekeler is dealing with an injury. And it's not a great one. He's already dealing with a hamstring injury. He missed Tuesday's and Wednesday's practice. And yes, he may have gotten a little bit of reps today and is expected to play this upcoming Sunday. What I immediately think of is, man, I want to protect my investment. Going into week 1, I don't want to make the mistake of falling into the trap and not having the backup running back of Austin Ekeler. Of course, Austin Ekeler missed significant time last year with the hamstring injury and a hyperextended knee. But going into the 2021 season, if in fact you have the ability to stash a Justin Jackson on your bench, if you are an Austin Ekeler owner, I absolutely expect that you should be doing so before the week even begins. It is going to be a tougher matchup, and there is a possibility that he re-aggravates this injury. And though it may not be as severe as last season, there's a potential that he could get injured and miss time. And with Justin Jackson being available in 83% of leagues, I mean, it just seems like you just have to do it. You have to secure your investment. Whether it is you're a manager for Zeke, you're getting Pollard. For Dalvin Cook, you're getting Alexander Mattison. You always want to get your handcuffs. And though Austin Ekeler may not be that upper echelon of the running back position where you have to grab his handcuff, the injury concerns in my eyes makes me worry about it. And I absolutely want to go ahead and grab Justin Jackson. He is by no way a potential start this week. If we end up getting information in which Austin Ekeler is going to miss this week, then yes, you potentially might want to play him because he is just as viable in the receiving game. In the last couple seasons, specifically last year, we have seen Justin Jackson fill into this starting role and be a great fantasy prospect. In fact, last season, in weeks 5, 7, 8, and 17, when he was healthy and he was the back of mention on this offense, he scored 11.9, 8, 15.7 and 12.9 fantasy points in those 4 contests. In those games, in those 4 games that he played, he had a total of 14 receptions. Again, regardless of what you may think, he is going to get opportunity and he's going to potentially fill into a great role if in fact something happens to Austin Ekeler. So just putting it out there, you want to be cautious and you want to grab your investments handcuff, specifically Justin Jackson. With that mentioned, we can move on to our final hidden gem for this week. It is the Mind Stone. As I am cursed with knowledge, I present to you Jarvis Landry, a guy that, yes, he is rostered in more than 70% of leagues and is only being started in 11% of said leagues, which is very interesting in my eyes because you think a lot of people believe in Jarvis Landry, but they don't believe in him specifically in this matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, which, in my opinion, is a mistake. I think Jarvis Landry, similar to a Marquise Brown or a Russell Gage like I mentioned today, is another one of these prospects that could very easily be started in a full PPR, half PPR scoring format and find a lot of success. When I look at what he was capable of doing last season at the back end of the year from weeks 12 through 17, and of course, the first 2 weeks of the NFL playoffs against the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Kansas City Chiefs, he found a lot of success. In fact, in those 7 contests that he played, he scored 6 touchdowns and was in double-digit points in a half PPR scoring format in all but 1. And in my opinion, going into this upcoming week, based on the amount of opportunity we saw from Jarvis Landry last year, just at the end of the season, I know you're getting Odell Beckham back, but that perhaps even opens up the offense even more to find more comfort. You have Austin Hooper being implemented into this offense, who of course is going to be a major factor, because finally, after an entire year, this team has found its stride and find exactly how they should succeed and how they should approach every single week by, of course, pounding the rock, but then using play action to find a lot of success. I mean, last year in those 7 games that I mentioned, he was averaging 8.86 targets per game. Going into this upcoming week, cursed with knowledge, I believe that Jarvis Landry, though he is being undervalued, is a very viable potential option this upcoming week in a full PPR, half PPR scoring format. And based on the fact that he's been able to see and catch the eye of a guy like Baker Mayfield down in the red zone, which of course is extremely vital for all fantasy prospects. They called me a madman, and what I predicted came to pass. And going into this upcoming week, we have gone ahead and we've collected our 6 hidden gems. And though you may be thinking, Andrew, where's the gauntlet? I've got it right here. Oh, that's right. We've got ourselves our 6 hidden gems with Russell Gage, Terrace Marshall, Marquise Brown, Tevin Coleman, Justin Jackson, and Jarvis Landry. I want to thank you all for watching. And until next time, which will be tomorrow, talking about matchups in specific, I'll see you guys. Peace.